My father-in-law left me his house instead of his own son, so my husband tried to forge the will. When Frank died, I expected his son David, my husband of 8 years, to inherit everything. Frank had always been cold to me, barely acknowledging my existence at family dinners. He'd grunt responses to my questions and never once thanked me for the casseroles I brought over. So imagine my shock when the lawyer called on a Tuesday morning while I was folding laundry. "Mrs. Morrison, your father-in-law has left you the family estate on Maple Drive, including all contents and financial assets." I dropped the phone. The estate was worth over $2 million, a sprawling Victorian house with 12 rooms, antique furniture, and Frank's classic car collection. David was in the kitchen when I told him, stirring sugar into his coffee like he did every morning for 8 years. His routine was sacred: 2 cups, 3 sugar cubes, never cream. "That's impossible," he said, his face going white. The coffee mug slipped from his hands and shattered against the tile floor. "Dad would never leave you anything. He barely tolerated you." "The reading is tomorrow at 2 p.m., I said, still processing the shock myself. That night, David paced our bedroom like a caged animal. There has to be an explanation. Maybe he was confused from the medications. Maybe someone influenced him. "David, your father was sharp until the end. Sharp enough to screw over his only son?" The next day, we sat in Mr. Henderson's mahogany-paneled office. David's hands were shaking as the lawyer read the will aloud with deliberate precision. "To my daughter-in-law, Sarah Morrison, who showed me more genuine kindness in 8 years than my own son showed in 35. I leave my house at 1247 Maple Drive and all its contents, including my investment portfolio valued at $1.2 million. David shot up from his chair like he'd been electrocuted. "This is wrong." My father was sick, confused. Sarah manipulated him during those visits. Mr. Henderson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses calmly. "Your father came to me 6 months ago, Mr. Morrison. He was of completely sound mind and very clear about his intentions." "But why?" David demanded, turning to me with wild eyes. "What did you do to him?" I thought about all those Tuesday afternoons I'd spent with Frank after his stroke, helping him shower when David claimed he was too busy with work, reading mystery novels to him when David said hospitals made him uncomfortable, sitting through his chemo treatments when David couldn't handle seeing his father weak. "I just visited him," I said quietly. David's face twisted with pure rage. "We're contesting this. There's no way in hell—" "Actually," Mr. Henderson interrupted, "there's something else your father left." He pulled out a sealed envelope. "A letter. He suspected you might challenge the will?" David went completely pale. "What kind of letter?" The lawyer's expression darkened as he scanned the contents. "One that explains exactly why he chose your wife over his own son, in very specific detail." David grabbed my arm so hard I winced, his fingers digging into my flesh. "We're leaving, right now." In the car, David was silent until we reached a red light on Main Street. Then he turned to me with eyes I'd never seen before, cold and calculating. "You're going to sign that house over to me tomorrow." "David, I don't think, or I'll make sure you never see a penny of any of it. I'll drag you through court for years." That night, I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to find David hunched over his laptop in the dark. On the screen was a PDF of Frank's will, with David's name carefully typed where mine had been. I stood frozen in the doorway of our home office, watching my husband of 8 years forge his father's will. The blue glow of the laptop illuminated David's face as he meticulously changed every instance of Sarah Elizabeth Morrison to David James Morrison. His tongue was sticking out slightly in concentration, the same expression he wore when balancing our checkbook or assembling IKEA furniture. "What are you doing?" I whispered into the darkness. He spun around so fast the office chair nearly toppled over, slamming the laptop shut with a sharp crack. "Nothing. Go back to bed, Sarah." But I'd seen enough. My hands were shaking as I backed toward the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. "David, that's illegal. You could go to prison for forgery." He stood up slowly, unfolding his 6-foot frame, and for the first time in 8 years of marriage, I was genuinely afraid of him. The man who'd cried during our wedding vows, who brought me soup when I had the flu, who'd held me through 3 miscarriages. That man was gone. In his place stood someone I didn't recognize. "Nobody's going to prison," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You're going to keep your mouth shut, and we're going to submit this corrected version to Henderson tomorrow morning." "Corrected version?" I stared at him in complete disbelief. "David, that's fraud. That's a felony." "That's justice!" he snapped, his mask slipping for just a moment. "I'm his son. I'm his blood. I deserve that house, not some woman who showed up 8 years ago and played nursemaid to get into his will." The cruelty in his voice hit me like a physical blow. This was the man who'd promised to love and protect me through sickness and health, who'd held me while I sobbed about my own father's sudden heart attack 2 years ago, who'd convinced me that his family's coldness toward me didn't matter because we had each other. "Your father was completely clear about what he wanted," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. David laughed, but there was no humor in it, just bitter resentment that seemed to have been festering for decades. "My father was a senile old man who you systematically manipulated. Those precious Tuesday visits? I know exactly what you were really doing. Whispering poison in his ear, turning him against his own son, making yourself indispensable so he'd remember you in his will. I was taking care of him because you wouldn't," I shot back. "I had a job. I had real responsibilities. I couldn't just drop everything to play caregiver like some unemployed housewife." The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I had quit my teaching job 3 years ago when David convinced me we didn't need 2 incomes, that he wanted to take care of me. Now I realized it had been about control, not love. He was dying, David. He needed his family. David's face twisted with years of suppressed rage. "Don't you dare lecture me about family. You have no idea what it was like growing up with that man. The constant criticism, the impossible standards. The way nothing I ever did was good enough. Perfect grades weren't enough. Making varsity wasn't enough. Getting into law school wasn't enough. He always found something wrong, something to nitpick. So you abandoned him when he needed you most? I protected myself from his toxic bullshit. Something you wouldn't understand with your perfect little family where everyone actually loved each other. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had always resented my close relationship with my parents, making snide comments about how some people had it easy. Yet he couldn't understand why his father chose someone who actually showed him kindness. I turned to leave, planning to grab my phone and call Mr. Henderson immediately, but David's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist with bruising force. Where do you think you're going? To call the lawyer and tell him what you're doing. His grip tightened until I gasped in pain, his fingers like a vice around my bones. You're not calling anyone. We're going to fix this together tomorrow. You're going to smile and apologize for the confusion, explain that you were emotional and misunderstood Frank's intentions, and we're going to submit the real will. Let go of me, David. Promise me first, Sarah. Promise me you won't say anything. I'm not promising anything. This is insane. He twisted my wrist until tears sprang to my eyes, the pain shooting up my arm. Promise me, or I'll make your life a living hell. I'll contest the will anyway and drag you through court for years. I'll tell everyone you seduced my dying father for his money. I'll hire investigators to dig up every embarrassing thing about your past. I'll make sure you never see a penny of that inheritance. Nobody would believe that, I said, but doubt was creeping in. Really? A young wife who conveniently shows up every Tuesday when the vulnerable old man is alone and confused? Who suddenly inherits everything while his devoted son gets nothing? What do you think that would look like to a jury? Especially when I tell them about all those times you encouraged him to change his medications, all those private conversations behind closed doors. I stared at him, realizing with crystal clarity that I was married to a complete stranger. 8 years, and I'd never truly known this man. This isn't you, David. This isn't who you are. This is exactly who I am, he said coldly. You just never bothered to pay attention. You were too busy playing the perfect wife, weren't you? He finally released my wrist, leaving angry red marks that were already starting to bruise. We'll leave for Henderson's office at 1:30 tomorrow. Wear something nice. That blue dress I bought you for your birthday. Look respectable. And Sarah? His smile was ice cold. If you even think about betraying me, remember that I know where you sleep every single night. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. Cross me on this, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I locked myself in our guest bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, my mind racing in circles. 8 years of marriage, and I'd never seen this side of him. The calculated manipulation, the casual threats, the willingness to use physical force. How had I missed all the signs? But as I replayed our entire relationship with new eyes, the red flags had been there from the beginning. The way he'd gradually isolated me from my college friends, claiming they were jealous of our happiness and didn't really understand our relationship. How he'd convinced me to quit my teaching job, saying he made enough money and wanted to take care of me, but really removing my financial independence. The subtle criticisms disguised as loving concern. The way he'd make me feel guilty for wanting to visit my own parents, claiming I was choosing them over him. I'd mistaken control for protection, possessiveness for love. At 3:17 a.m., I crept out of the bathroom as quietly as possible. David was snoring loudly in our bedroom, the laptop closed on his nightstand like evidence waiting to be destroyed. I tiptoed to the kitchen and called the one person I trusted completely. Sarah? Jesus, it's 3 a.m, my sister Emma answered, her voice thick with sleep. What's wrong? I need help, I whispered, then explained everything. Frank's will, the inheritance, David's forgery, his threats. Pack a bag right now and get out of there, Emma said immediately, all traces of sleepiness gone. Come to my place. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. I can't leave. If I disappear tonight, he'll know I'm planning to expose him. He'll have time to cover his tracks, maybe even destroy the evidence. Then what's your plan? I looked toward our bedroom where my husband was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about his $2 million inheritance. I'm going to beat him at his own game. The next morning, David was unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming while he made his coffee with that same precise ritual. 2 cups, 3 sugar cubes, never cream. He even made me scrambled eggs, something he hadn't done in months. Ready for our appointment with Henderson? He asked, kissing my forehead like the previous night had never happened. I forced what I hoped was a convincing smile. Actually, about that. I've been thinking all night, and I think you're right. Frank was sick those last few months. The medications were affecting his judgment. He didn't really know what he was doing. David's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. Really? You mean that? I don't deserve that house or his money. You're his son, his flesh and blood. It should go to family. I'll tell Mr. Henderson there was a misunderstanding, that I was too emotional to think clearly yesterday. That's my girl, he said, pulling me into a tight hug. I knew you'd see reason once you calmed down. You've always been so logical, so fair. It's one of the things I love most about you. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost believed he meant it. At 1:30 sharp, we walked into Henderson's office together. I was wearing the blue dress David had requested, and he kept his hand possessively on my lower back. Mr. Henderson looked genuinely surprised to see us back so soon. How can I help you folks today? There's been a terrible mistake, I said, letting my voice shake. Not with fear this time, but with anticipation of what was coming. About Frank's will. What kind of mistake, Mrs. Morrison? David leaned forward eagerly, practically bouncing in his chair. My wife thinks she may have misunderstood my father's intentions yesterday. She was emotional, overwhelmed by grief. The house should obviously go to his son, his actual family. Mr. Henderson frowned, his weathered face creasing with confusion. Mrs. Morrison, your father-in-law was extremely specific about his wishes. He came to me multiple times over 6 months to make sure everything was legally ironclad. There's absolutely no misunderstanding. But surely, David interrupted, if Sarah doesn't want the house and is willing to sign it over? Actually, I said, pulling out my phone with steady hands, before we discuss anything else, I think you should see something important. I'd spent the morning figuring out how to extract and edit the footage from our home security cameras, the same cameras David had insisted we install throughout the house for protection after a rash of break-ins in our neighborhood. The irony was delicious. I played the crystal-clear video of David at his laptop at 2:17 a.m., methodically changing every instance of my name to his on the will document. The blood drained from David's face so quickly I thought he might faint. That's not what it looks like, he stammered, his confident demeanor crumbling. Really? Mr. Henderson leaned forward, studying the phone screen with sharp interest. Because it looks exactly like you're systematically altering a legal document, which, as you know, is a felony. I was confused, emotional about losing my father. I wasn't thinking clearly. I never intended to actually submit anything, clearly enough to change every single instance of your wife's name to yours, the lawyer observed dryly. That suggests quite a bit of deliberate thought and planning. David turned to me with desperate eyes, his mask finally slipping completely. You recorded me? Your own husband? How could you betray me like this? How could I betray you? I stared at him in amazement. You threatened me, physically hurt me, and tried to steal your father's final wishes. My husband wouldn't do any of those things. Sarah, please. I was upset, not thinking straight. I didn't mean any of it. You know I'd never really hurt you. I pulled up my sleeve, showing the dark purple bruises on my wrist from where he'd grabbed me. You already did hurt me, Mr. Henderson was already reaching for his phone. Mr. Morrison, I hope you understand that forging a will is a serious felony. I'm legally required to report this to the authorities. Wait, David's voice cracked with panic. You can't do this. Sarah, tell him it was just a misunderstanding. Tell him I was grieving and made a stupid mistake. Like your father's will was a stupid mistake? I asked calmly. Please, David begged, actually getting on his knees beside my chair. I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling, anger management, whatever you want. I'll never touch you again. Just don't let them arrest me. You should have thought about that before you decided to commit fraud. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to live? You're taking everything from me. I'm not taking anything. Your father gave me what he wanted me to have. You're the one who tried to steal it. As the police arrived to take David's statement and collect the evidence, I thought about Frank's letter, the one Mr. Henderson had mentioned but never fully read aloud. I asked to see it while David was being questioned in the next room. My dear Sarah, it began in Frank's distinctive shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, it means David has shown his true colors and contested my will. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I've been watching my son all his life, hoping he'd change, praying he'd develop some sense of empathy or gratitude. But some people never learn to see beyond their own wants and needs. You showed me more genuine kindness in the last 2 years of my life than David showed me in 35 years. When I had my stroke, he visited exactly 3 times in 6 months. When I started chemotherapy, he couldn't be bothered to drive me to a single appointment. When I was lying in that hospital bed, scared and alone, wondering if I was going to die, you were the one who sat with me. You read me those ridiculous mystery novels I loved. You brought me real food when the hospital slop was inedible. You held my hand when the pain was unbearable. David couldn't even look at me those last months. I disgusted him, reminded him of his own mortality. But you saw me as a human being worth caring for, not because you wanted something from me, but because it was the right thing to do. I know David will claim you manipulated me, that you turned me against him. The truth is, he turned me against himself years ago with his selfishness and indifference. You are the daughter I never had, and I trust you to use my home to build the family you deserve, whether that's with David if he can change, or with someone who truly appreciates your worth. Don't let my son's bitterness poison the gift I'm giving you. You've earned every penny through your kindness and compassion. Be happy, Sarah, and know that someone finally sees your true value. With love and gratitude, Frank Morrison. P.S. If David is reading this over your shoulder, know that I'm not senile, I'm not confused, and I'm not being manipulated. I'm finally doing what I should have done years ago, rewarding genuine love over biological obligation. Tears blurred my vision as I read it twice, then carefully folded the letter and put it in my purse. But that wasn't the end of Frank's surprises. 2 days later, Mr. Henderson called me back to his office. There's one more thing your father-in-law left you, he said, pulling out a small wooden box. He insisted I wait until after any complications were resolved. Inside the box was a key and another letter. Sarah, this key opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find some additional items I wanted you to have. My mother's jewelry, some old photographs, and one more surprise. The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, is expecting you. Also, I've arranged for the property taxes on the house to be paid from a separate account for the next 10 years. I know David might try to make things financially difficult for you, so I wanted to ensure you could keep the house regardless of what happens. You'll never have to worry about losing your home. Frank. At the bank, Mrs. Chen led me to the safety deposit box with solemn ceremony. Inside, along with beautiful vintage jewelry and family photos dating back to the 1940s, was a deed to a small cabin in the mountains, Frank's secret retreat that even David didn't know about. Mr. Morrison purchased this property 15 years ago, Mrs. Chen explained. He used to go there to fish and think. He said it was the only place he ever felt truly peaceful. There was also a bank statement showing an account with $200,000. Money Frank had been quietly saving from his pension and Social Security for years. For emergencies, his note read. Or for whatever makes you happy. You've given me more happiness in 2 years than I had in the previous 30. Use this to live the life you deserve. I drove up to the cabin that weekend. It was a small, rustic place with a stone fireplace and windows overlooking a pristine lake. Frank had left it fully furnished, with bookshelves full of mystery novels and a tackle box ready for fishing. On the kitchen table was one final note. Welcome to your sanctuary. I hope you find as much peace here as I did. The neighbors, Bill and Margaret Thompson, have been keeping an eye on the place. They're good people who knew about my gift to you and are excited to meet you. There's a garden plot out back where Margaret says the tomatoes grow especially well. I think you'll like it here. Love, Frank. 3 weeks later, I served David with divorce papers. He'd been staying at his cousin's cramped apartment across town, calling me 15 times a day with increasingly desperate apologies and promises to change. But I'd finally learned the difference between manipulation and genuine remorse. The divorce was surprisingly straightforward. Since Frank's inheritance was clearly intended for me alone, and we'd kept separate bank accounts, David couldn't claim much beyond his personal belongings and half the value of our modest house, which we'd have to sell anyway since I couldn't afford the mortgage on my own. David's lawyer tried to argue that Frank's gifts were marital property, but Mr. Henderson had anticipated this too. Every document explicitly stated that the inheritance was for Sarah Morrison individually, not as part of any marital estate. During the proceedings, I learned more about David's relationship with his father. Frank had tried repeatedly over the years to bridge the gap between them. He'd offered to pay for family therapy, invited David on fishing trips, even offered to help start David's own law practice. David had rejected every overture, claiming his father was trying to control him. The truth is, David's own cousin testified, David was always jealous of anyone who got Frank's attention. Even as kids, if Frank praised another family member or spent time with someone else, David would sulk for days. The final blow came when David's therapist, the one he'd been court-ordered to see, submitted a report stating that David had significant narcissistic tendencies and difficulty accepting responsibility for his actions. The therapist recommended continued counseling and anger management classes. 6 months later, as I sat in Frank's beautiful garden, my garden now, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine peace. I'd planted the vegetable garden Frank had always wanted, but never had the strength to maintain. Tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, herbs. The whole backyard smelled like fresh earth and growing things. Emma visited every weekend, bringing her 2 kids to play in the spacious yard. Frank would have loved seeing this, she said one Saturday, watching her 5-year-old chase butterflies among the flower beds. He did love it, I replied. Deadheading roses. That's exactly why he made sure it would continue to be cared for. I'd also started volunteering at the local hospice, reading to patients and helping families navigate the difficult final months. Frank's letter had given me a new perspective on what really mattered. Not money or inheritance, but the simple act of showing up for people when they need it most. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply rewarding. I met families going through the same struggles I'd witnessed with Frank, and I could offer them practical advice as well as emotional support. How to talk to doctors, how to make difficult decisions, how to find moments of joy even in the darkest times. One patient, an elderly woman named Dorothy, reminded me so much of Frank that I started bringing her the same mystery novels I'd read to him. Her grandson, Marcus, was going through a bitter divorce and barely visited. Dorothy would light up when I arrived each Tuesday, the same day I'd visited Frank. "You remind me of my daughter," she told me one afternoon. "She died 10 years ago. Cancer. She would have loved you." When Dorothy passed 6 months later, she left me a small inheritance, her collection of first edition mystery novels, and a letter thanking me for making her final months bearable when her own family couldn't be bothered. Marcus contested her will, claiming I'd manipulated his grandmother just like David had accused me of manipulating Frank. But the hospice staff testified about my regular visits and genuine care for Dorothy. The judge ruled in my favor, noting that kindness is not manipulation, and those who confuse the two often reveal more about themselves than the person they're accusing. A year after Frank's death, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyer. David had been sentenced to 200 hours of community service and 2 years of probation for the will forgery, but avoided jail time due to his previously clean record and what the judge called genuine remorse. He'd moved to Denver and started working for a nonprofit law clinic helping low-income families navigate legal issues. "Sarah," the letter began in David's familiar handwriting, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just want you to know that therapy has helped me understand what both you and my father saw that I was blind to for so long. I spent my whole life feeling entitled to things I never earned. Love, respect, inheritance, while you earned all of those things through simple human decency and consistent kindness. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved that I never saw what I was actually receiving. Working with families here who have so little but give so much to each other has been humbling. I met a woman last week who reminded me of you. She's caring for her husband who has Alzheimer's, working 2 jobs and raising their grandchildren, but she still volunteers to read to kids at the library every Saturday. When I asked why she does so much for others when her own life is so difficult, she said, "Because kindness doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything." That's when I finally understood what my father meant when he called you the daughter he never had. You have something I never learned but am trying to develop, the ability to love people without expecting anything in return. You cared for him because he needed caring for, not because you wanted something from him. I hope someday I can become the person you thought you married, even if it's too late for us. You deserved so much better than the man I was, and I'm trying to become someone who could be worthy of the love you showed my father. I hope you're happy in the house. Dad would be proud of what you're doing with it. I drive by sometimes when I'm in town visiting my cousin, and seeing the garden in bloom and the lights on in the evening makes me smile. It looks like a home should look, warm and alive and loved. With sincere regret and hope for your happiness, David. P.S. I'm in therapy twice a week now and working with a sponsor through a program for people with control issues. I'm learning to take responsibility for my actions instead of blaming others for my problems. It's hard work, but necessary work. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Some bridges once burned don't need rebuilding. But I was glad to know David was getting help and trying to change, even if it was too late for our marriage. Instead of dwelling on the past, I spent that afternoon planting a memorial rose bush in Frank's honor, next to the wooden bench where we used to sit together during those Tuesday visits. The roses were the old-fashioned kind that smell like heaven, Frank's favorite variety that his mother had grown in this same garden decades earlier. Sometimes I still sit on that bench in the evenings watching the sunset and telling Frank about the renovations I'm planning, or the book I'm reading, or the new patients I'm meeting at the hospice. I like to think he can hear me, and I know he's proud that his final act of love couldn't be forged, stolen, or corrupted by his son's greed, only honored by someone who understood that inheritance isn't about blood relations, but about the family we choose to create through our actions. The house feels alive now in a way it never did when Frank was declining and David was absent. I've opened up rooms that had been closed for years, filled them with light and laughter when Emma's family visits, turned Frank's sterile study into a cozy reading nook where I can curl up with those mystery novels, the same ones I used to read to him. I also discovered Frank's workshop in the basement, filled with woodworking tools and half-finished projects. He'd been building a rocking chair, probably for the grandchildren he'd never had. I'm taking woodworking classes now to finish it, along with the birdhouses and garden benches he'd started. Working with my hands in his space feels like a conversation across time. Every Tuesday, I still think of Frank, not with sadness, but with gratitude for the unexpected gift he gave me. Not just financial security, but the knowledge that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems unnoticed. He saw everything, remembered everything, and in the end, he made sure that love won over entitlement. Last month, I got a call from Marcus, Dorothy's grandson who had contested her will. He was calling to apologize. I found some letters my grandmother wrote but never sent, he said. All about you, about how much your visits meant to her, about how you reminded her of her daughter. I was angry and looking for someone to blame for my own guilt about not visiting more. I'm sorry I put you through that legal mess. It's okay, I told him. Grief makes people do things they normally wouldn't. She really loved you, he said. And reading her letters, I can see why. You gave her something I couldn't. Your time and attention without wanting anything in return. These days, I split my time between the main house and Frank's mountain cabin. The neighbors, Bill and Margaret Thompson, have become like surrogate grandparents. Margaret taught me to can vegetables from the garden, and Bill showed me the best fishing spots on the lake. They tell me stories about Frank's visits over the years, how peaceful he seemed here, how he talked about wanting to share this place with someone who would appreciate it. He said he was waiting for the right person, Margaret told me one evening as we sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset. Said he'd know them when he found them. Guess he found you. I've also started writing, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the confidence to try. There's something about the quiet of the mountains and the rhythm of the seasons that makes the words flow. I'm working on a book about caregiving, about finding grace in difficult situations, about how the people we care for often give us more than we give them. Frank's story is in there, and Dorothy's, and all the other patients I've met at the hospice who taught me that love isn't something you hoard or demand, but something you give freely and trust to find its way back to you in unexpected forms. The book proposal got picked up by a small press that specializes in memoirs about family and healing. My editor says the title, Tuesday Afternoons, Lessons in Love and Loss, perfectly captures the heart of the story. On the 2-year anniversary of Frank's death, I organized a memorial service at the house. Emma and her family came, along with Mr. Henderson, several of Frank's former neighbors, and some of the staff from the hospice where I volunteer. We planted a memorial garden with all of Frank's favorite flowers and shared stories about kindness and second chances. David didn't come, but he sent a wreath with a card that said simply, "Thank you for loving my father the way he deserved. I hope someday I can learn to love that way too." It was the first acknowledgement he'd ever made that love is a choice and a practice, not something you deserve by accident of birth. As the sun set on that anniversary evening, I sat on Frank's bench surrounded by the people who had become my chosen family. Emma's children playing in the garden, Margaret and Bill sharing stories, Mr. Henderson quietly reading one of Frank's mystery novels. This is what Frank had envisioned when he left me his home. Not just a building, but a gathering place for love and laughter, and the kind of ordinary moments that make life extraordinary. The house is mine now, legally and completely, but more importantly, it's become what Frank always hoped it could be, a place where kindness lives and grows, where people are valued for who they are rather than what they can provide, where every Tuesday afternoon is a reminder that love freely given always finds its way home. That's a legacy worth inheriting, worth protecting, and worth passing on to the next generation, who will understand that the most valuable things in life can't be forged, stolen, or demanded, only earned through the simple, revolutionary act of showing up for each other when it matters most.